Hello, welcome to Business Immigration. This is a presentation about the fourth and fifth preference categories of permanent employment, known as EB-4 and EB-5. We are starting with the EB-4. EB-4 is a group that includes a lot of small subgroups of eligibility for a green card. Some of them are not related to employment whatsoever. Some of them are somewhat related to employment. For our purposes, the important subgroup is the religious worker, the permanent counterpart of the R1 that we discussed earlier in the course. The requirements are similar. One major difference is that the beneficiary foreign national must be a person who have worked for the religious order abroad or in the US for the 2 years immediately preceding the filing of the petition. And that work cannot be merely volunteering. It has to be compensated in some way. We talked about the fact that in this particular case for religious worker, compensation doesn't have to be exclusively in money. It can be in other benefit. It might not be in money at all, but only in provisions, room, board, and so on. The three subcategories, minister, professional, and religious vocation, are the same as in the R1 context. And the three have to prove the same thing. Religious vocation will have to show lifelong commitment through vow to a religious way of life. The professional has to show how is the position professional and how it is religious in the context of that denomination. And once again, the applicant, the petitioning organization, the future employer must be a 501c3. This is an absolute requirement, and only organizations that have this designation by the IRS can sponsor a religious worker for a permanent position. How the organization prove eligibility? First of all, it has to show a good standing in the 501c3 category. Then they have to show that the foreign national has worked 2 years right until the time of the petition with the organization abroad. Um, they have to show qualification to serve as a minister, ordination, or whatever it is that that particular order has. If it's a professional, the qualification of a professional, and if there is a vocation, they have to show that the person really has a lifelong commitment to that way of life. Um, the proof of the religious nature has to be shown in order to establish that that particular organization is really a religious denomination. That might be sound a little silly, but since the category is not limited merely to one or two or three large religions that are everybody is familiar with, um, there is a need to establish this. This can be very complicated for very new and small orders, and can be very simple for a new church or a new congregation, um, which have a long line of history and have um, a whole lot of doctrine and books and a place of worship and so on. There has to be shown on the ability of the employer to pay or provide the compensations that they say that they're going to give to the person. So if they say that they're going to give the person room and board, they have to show that they have a room and board, or that they have enough money to finance a room or board. Um, this is important. Again, this is an indication for the seriousness of the offer. If there is no real ability behind it to actually support the foreign national, then obviously this cannot, or most likely will not work, and therefore cannot be approved. Once the petition is approved, then USCIS will notify the organization and the person. The person can proceed to get adjustment of status or an immigrant visa abroad. There's no concurrent filing here, so the organization and person must wait. Also, before approval, USCIS must conduct a site visit. This is again a remnant of times when there were a lot of fraud in these categories of religious workers, because it was generally relatively easy to get, very little oversight, and that opened the door to quite a bit of abuse in the past. So now it's a lot more strict, and USCIS is looking at these carefully and make sure to visit the organization if this is their first application. We move to the EB-5 employment creation. This is a different category altogether where a foreign investor or foreign person that has sufficient amount of money can invest it in the United States in a commercial enterprise in order to generate um, sufficient economic output that can support 10 permanent jobs for U.S. workers. And in that regard, it has to be workers that are not the person's immediate family, um, nor the investor themselves. And the investment in this case has to be in a commercial enterprise. There is no way to do that with a non-for-profit or something of that sort. It has to be a commercial enterprise. The investment can be in cash or inventory, equipment, and sometime even intellectual property and so on. And it's all valued at fair market value in US dollars. And if, again, it's not cash that is used, then there has to be certain appraisal that shows the value of every item. The permanent position for U.S. workers, when it's a standalone application uh, for an investor who's coming to manage their own enterprise, has to be 10 permanent full-time position, not something temporary, not part-time, and not 9 or less employees. It has to be 10 and it has to be full-time. The permanent jobs uh, is a major issue, obviously. First of all, because it's the main underlying purpose of this whole category, and generally that means that the new position must all be generated recently. Creating the term permanent position in the United States. If it's a new investment in a new enterprise, there has to be 10 new jobs created in order for the petition to pass muster. If it's an existing business, it has to add 10 more workers. If it's the business is a distressed business, and there is a definition there in the regulation in the law what exactly that is, then sometime maintenance of the same number of employees might suffice. If that cash infusion by the investor actually makes keeps the business afloat, then it's understood why it might not be possible to create 10 more jobs, but saving jobs also has importance. Um, the initial petition is filed on a particular form. There's no concurrent filing, and the evidence that have to be it has to you have to show what the enterprise is. You have to show um, that there are licenses when those are required. You have to show that there is sufficient funds um, to the purpose of the investment. So it's not enough that it's a million. It has to be shown that what is needed is a million. Maybe if what needed is 5 million, the person will have to show 5 million availability. So it's important. The 1 million or 500,000, depending on the area, is just the threshold. You still have to have investment that corresponds um, to what the enterprise is going to be. So that is important, and it's similar to the E2 classification. Um, Job creation is evidenced through W-2s, I-9s, and other forms in order to establish that there really are 10 people working there and that they're working full time. The investment for a single employer, um, when it's a standalone application, when the person is running their own business, the person has to be actively managing the investment. We mentioned the regional center program where where the organization, the regional center runs the projects, and the investor keeps a far smaller active role in the process by way of being a shareholder or a partner in many cases, and being able to review the reports and attend annual meetings and so on. But for that, the entire process is done by others, and the investor is not tied to managing that investment. We mentioned here also that for this type of regional center project, another main benefit is the ability of the investor to avail themselves of induced employment through econometric models that show how much of the investment create a cascading effect that is not only the direct worker. So if it's a construction project, it obviously creates certain amount of construction jobs, but it also creates certain amount of food workers in order to provide food for those construction employees, and laundry facilities and housing enterprises and so on. So there are models that allow calculation of how many jobs are created per particular dollar invested in a particular type of project. Once the initial immigrant visa is approved for the investor, um, then the person would get the right to apply for a green card or adjustment of status, but that green card will be conditional. It will be valid for 2 years in order for USCIS to have an opportunity to review after 2 years whether the business still exists, whether the investment is still there, and whether the 10 employees are still there. This is somewhat similar to what you would see in a newly married immigration case where the green card is conditional for 2 years and there is a need to remove it um, by showing certain things. This is similar in principle, but very different, of course, in context and in detail. After the investor received their conditional green card, they need to remove the condition by filing again with USCIS, showing that the investment is still there, the 10 employees are still there, and the other representation made earlier are still in full force and effect. They want to make sure that the investment is not withdrawn. They want to make sure that the employees are still there being paid. Um, and oftentimes that can be quite difficult if circumstances change or if the nature of the business change, which is sometimes that, something that may happen. Let's say the business started as a department store, but now they find out that it's better to do a supermarket. Um, so in this kind of situation, that might completely be fatal to a removal of condition, which might land the immigrant in removal proceeding, or perhaps if things go well, to file a new I-526 and get 2 additional year of conditional residency in order to have a chance to establish that business and again remove the condition. Um,